Now, may I request Father Roy to enlighten us about our call and how we should prepare ourselves in the core of our call for a mission of the church, mission of Jesus Christ himself. Father Roy, please.
Thank you, Father Saju, for your great introduction. So, my dear sisters and brother fathers, thank you for having me invited to be part of this spiritual exercise. As the title speaks, the title, Strengthening Our Call for Apostolic Mission. We have two parts in this title. Number one, strengthening our call, and number two, our apostolic mission. See, for strengthening our call, we must go back to the first moment you have received your call. Before all your challenges, concerns, confusions, and critiques, you must try to go back to the first moment you have received that call. I'm sure that we all would recover that moment with enormous grace and spiritual clarity. So that means recovering of that moment is decisively important for carrying out our mission. Let me share with you an incredible scene in a great movie. That movie is titled Brother, Sun, and Sister Moon. I advise every one of you spend some time to watch this great movie. Actually, this movie is about St. Francis of Assisi, filmed back in 1960. In this movie, there is a beautiful scene where Francis and his friends, actually 12 of them, arrived at the papal palace in Vatican. In the palace, while they reached there were cardinals and Swiss guards and many other caretakers and other people. Barefooted, poor Francis and his friends went there for getting permission to begin a new religious community of brothers. In front of that great audience, he knelt down and opened a great file, started reading the letter. He could not actually read the letter well because he was neither good in Italian nor in Latin. So he could not complete reading that letter. Then he closed that letter, that file, and meanwhile the cardinals looked around and exchanged, the messages, how this poor guy came from different places and putting things like this. There were a lot of exchanging messages. Then Francis actually started to say that very Sermon on the Mount, not just reading, but just reciting that very verse of Jesus from memory about poverty, humility, mercy, and so on. On the climax of the speech, he said, we all know that, consider the lilies of the field, how they grow, neither they toil nor spin, yet I tell you, even Solomon in all glory was not clothed like one of these. When they heard this, they lost their control. How dare you are to recite the words of Jesus in the presence of Pope? So some people rose up and they carried him away from the palace. After a few moments, the Pope, by the way, the Pope on those days was Innocent III. He dramatically, as if it was something inspired by the power of the Holy Spirit, lifted up his hands and commanded the securities to call them back. He came down from that top seat, papal seat, and looked at the eyes of these poor young friends intently. Especially he looked at the eyes of Francis. He said, when I began as a young priest, I was like you and like your followers, filled with greater simplicity and higher idealism. But see, years of church administration and other things extinguished that spirit. Then, to everyone's surprise, Innocent III knelt down and kissed the dirty, barefooted legs of these young people. See, my friends, keep this story as a background when I flesh out the further points. For strengthening our call, we must do at least three things. Actually, for this, this is more from one of the documents of Pope Francis. So for strengthening our call, we must do at least three things, both at the individual level and at the community level. Number one, we must look at the past with gratitude. So we must look at our past with gratitude. Number two, we must look, or we must live the present with passion. And number three, we must embrace the future with hope. I often refer one of the beautiful description given in Vita Consecrata, number 110. Pope Saint John Paul II said, "You have not only a glorious history to remember and to recount, but also a great history still to be accomplished. So look to the future, where the Spirit is sending you in order to do even greater things." Actually, I love this beautiful description. So we go to the first, straight away go to the first point. We must look to the past with gratitude for strengthening our call. How this is connected to that very, very core title of our subject about which we are talking about. See, we have a glorious history to remember and to recount. Remembering our history would make us joyful, and recounting our history would make us aware of our identity. See, so when you remember your history, the role that God has placed you in the salvation history, that would make you joyful. And recounting our history would make us aware of our identity. So see, why we must be happy, or why we should be happy. There are three reasons for that would make us happier. Number one, the Lord looked at me. Number two, the Lord called me. And number three, the Lord anointed me. Don't take it as something like a cliche that we are used to it. The Lord looked at me, the Lord called me, and the Lord anointed me. At the individual level, in calling, God says to you, you are important to me, I love you, and I'm counting on you. This is a secret of our joy at the personal level, because we are given a unique role to play in the history of salvation. Then at the community level, at the origin of our institutes or congregation, the Lord called certain individuals to follow him very closely. What was the purpose of that? This was to translate the gospel into a particular way of life. Actually, they read the signs of the time with an eye of faith and responded to the needs of the church creatively. So each community is given with a particular charism. So this makes our community joyful. So on the one side, our own personal call and our personal positioning would make us joyful. because we got a role in the history of salvation. At the community level, we all are happy, we all are joyful, because at the beginning of our institutes or our religious communities, Lord called some of our people, let it be our founders or foundresses, for translating the gospel into a particular context. So each one was given with a particular charism that we all carry forward with our life. See, sometimes what hinders us to, or what are the important barriers us to be joyful? Actually, three enemies to this gift of joy, always lurking at the door of our hearts. That means I may go through three points. Let it consider it as a kind of a checklist. If you could really enjoy the religious life you are in right now. Number one, narcissism. Don't scratch your head. It's a very quiet, very easy to understand. Narcissism, though that word sounds quite non-familiar. Narcissism means you idolize yourself. You concerned only with what is good for you. You live as if you are for you. A narcissist thinks life is good if I profit from it. So you ask, why should I give myself to others? Number two, victimism. I don't know if such a word is there in the English language. At least victimhood is there. Victimism. You consider yourself as a victim in the community. You always say, oh, no one understands me. No one helps me. No one loves me. You frequently ask, why aren't others concerned about me? This is the problem with victimism or victimhood. In no way you would enjoy your religious life. You are into this. Number three, pessimism. What does it mean? You complain about everything. Nothing is going well. You always say church is not going well. Society, politics, and everything is in trouble. So you criticize everything and does nothing. The pessimist gets angry with the world, but sits and does nothing. And you frequently ask, what is the meaning in giving in my life? So if you want to strengthen your call for looking your past with gratitude, you must get out of these three important elements. If at all you are into it, that would always hinder you to move forward. And now we move on to the second point, to live the present with the passion. You know, grateful remembrance of the past would make us to do the mission with a greater passion, because I'm called. My founders and foundresses were called for doing a particular mission. So we must have when you remember the past, that you make your presence as a joyful presence. When you live the present with passion, that would make you to be a prophetic presence in the world, about which the next speaker would talk probably more. Here, we must be attentive to the Spirit, so that we may listen to the Spirit speaks to the church, and to implement ever more fully the essential aspect of the consecrated life. So to live the present with passion, if you ask me, Father, how can I live? Or what do you think? How can I live my life with passion? See, my friends, actually we need at least three things if at all you want to live your life with passion. Number one, passionate love for Jesus. This is not a one-time business. This is a lifetime business. passionate love for Jesus. You know, Saint Teresa of Lisieux once said, I figure out my life. My vocation is love. Mind you, she said this in her 20s. In her own words, at last I have found my vocation. In the heart of the church, I will be love. See, the epicenter of our consecrated life is not social work, not the activities that you do, but rather love. Love for God and for his people. To put it differently, our heart is happiest when it beats for God and for his people. So St. Paul says, for to me to live is Christ. Our vows are definitely the concrete expressions of our passionate love. Vow, if you take that aspect of love from vows, it's a kind of a burdensome activity. No one wants such a kind of a life, and it's something like a waste. So our vows are definitely the concrete expressions of this passionate love. Number two, so we are discussing how to live our life passionately. Number two, you must be challenged by the gospel every day. See, let me ask to myself, am I really serious about the gospel and the gospel values? Pope Francis insists that we must consider gospel as truly the manual of our daily living and the decisions we are called to make. It's a very challenging and a demanding thing. And number three, if you want to live your life with a passion, learn the art of living in communion with others. We all know that we live in a very polarized world. So, in the words of Pope Francis, if you want to live, if you want to build up a good community, good consecrated religious community, you must be experts in communion. This is typical of Francis, experts in communion. For that, we must keep at least two things in our mind. Number one, we need a listening heart. A good translation or good way of putting the meaning of the word wisdom is listening heart. Listening heart, typical word of Pope Benedict XVI. And we must journey together, as the sister mentioned, synodality. So here we find a kind of an encounter. So pointless criticism, gossiping, envy, hostility, all this would destroy our communion. We all know that as our communities becomes, almost all the religious communities become increasingly international, we must learn the art of relating with persons of different cultures and different philosophical upbringings. So what must be the number one enemy against this passionate living? Have you ever thought of that? So we must live our life with a passion for strengthening our call. If that's the case, what should be the number one enemy against this passionate living? I must say, a kind of a lukewarm spirit. The desert fathers call it acedia, A-C-E-D-I-A, meaning sloth, spiritual laziness, lack of motivation to do anything. For instance, if a sister asks a kind of a CCD catechism student, oh, my dear student, do you want the catechism after the Mass or before the Mass? What would be the probable answer? The possible answer from an average catechism student would give you something like whatever, whenever, I don't care. So meaning is a kind of a lack of motivation, spiritual laziness. This is considered to be the parent of all the evils. St. Thomas Aquinas called this, something like a boredom of the soul. My friends, actually the distinctive sin of our time is not pride, not envy, not gluttony, not even lust, but acedia, sloth, spiritual laziness. St. Thomas Aquinas once said, those who find no joy in spiritual matters turn to the pleasures of the body. I don't want to elaborate that point. Those who find no joy in spiritual matters turn to the pleasures of the body. That does not mean that you will turn to the pleasures of a lust or something of that sort, but rather you would be cling to the temporal matters at the expense of the spiritual matters. You sacrifice the lasting things at the expense of the passing things. This is the problem with sloth or spiritual laziness. Then the third one, to embrace the future with hope. We all are we all require actually two important attitudes to embrace a future with hope. One is, put it negatively, avoid a defeatist attitude. Someone begins a battle without confidence has lost half of the battle before it has begun. So the enemy disguises himself as an angel of light and starts sowing seeds of pessimism. So avoid that defeatist attitude. As St. Paul says, if God is for us, who can be against us? Remember the promises of the Lord for getting you out of this defeatist attitude. The Lord said, do not be afraid. It is I. Take courage. So God will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. So no worries about that. Don't be trapped in that defeatist attitude. And put it positively, number two, build up a hopeful trust attitude. I caught Pope Benedict XVI. You should not join the ranks of the prophets of doom who proclaim the end or meaninglessness of the consecrated life in the church in our day. Rather, clothe yourself in Jesus Christ and put on the armor of light, as St. Paul urged. Keep awake and watchful. So each consecrated person, each consecrated person and each community must ask this question: is it that God and people today asking of us? Our role is quite different in our secular world of today. Before concluding this short presentation, let me share with you the second part of that very title of my presentation, that is about the apostolic present. Why our presence in this present secular world must be what some of the fathers of the church called apostolic presence. So please pay attention to this. We can have two kinds of mindset. Number one, Christendom mindset. I will explain what does this mean about. Christendom mindset. Number two, apostolic mindset. The present scenario is quite bluntly articulated by three prominent people in the church. Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen, Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI, and Pope Francis. Pope Francis recently said, brothers and sisters, Christendom no longer exists. Pope Benedict XVI recently said, the real crisis has scarcely begun. We have to count on terrible upheavals. I'm equally certain about what will remain at the end, the Church of Faiths. Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen, he said, we are at the end of Christendom, not of Christianity, not of the church. but of Christendom. What does it mean? What is mean by Christendom? Christendom means economic, political, and social life inspired by Christian principles. That is about to die. But he went on to say, it is not a gloomy picture. It is a picture of the church in the midst of increasing opposition from the world. And therefore, live your life in the full consciousness of this hour of testing and rally close to the heart of Christ. So we need to live a kind of a life with that passion that our apostles lived in the time of in the apostolic time. I move on to the second point. Here, our strategy must be something like both recent popes, Pope Benedict XVI and Pope Francis, said, we must reach out to the people and evangelize the peoples by way of attraction. You know, if we church grows not by proselytizing, but by way of attraction. Let me conclude that part with one scene of a kind of a Scottish philosopher. The Scottish philosopher and atheist named David Hume was once in a crowd listening to the famous preacher of that time, George Whitefield. Someone recognized Hume and said, I thought you did not believe in the gospel or in Jesus either. Hume responded, I do not. Then with a nod toward that Whitefield, he added, he does. What does it mean? Because George Whitefield was preaching and sharing the gospel with a greater passion that grabbed the attention of the people, even those people who had some kind of affiliation towards atheism. Just as flies attracted to a glowing light, our people will be attracted to the message of Christ if it burns with conviction and passion. So that must be our strategy. If you are passionate about your faith, let it out. Strengthen your call for doing your apostolic mission. Thank you.